Welcome to the People Leader Accelerator Podcast. I'm Executive Coach Jess Yuen, joined by my co-host, the co-founder and managing partner of People Leader Accelerator, Andrew Bartlow. On this show, we dive deep with business and HR leaders to uncover what really works when it comes to building high-performing organizations, navigating leadership challenges, and making better management decisions. Whether you're the first people leader at a startup or a seasoned executive at a company with scale, you'll find practical insights you can apply right away. For show notes and free bonus resources, visit peopleleaderaccelerator.com/podcast. And if you're looking for hands-on support from developing your leaders to creating a high-performance culture to hiring the right people, visit us at peopleleaderaccelerator.com. We'd love to help. Let's get into today's episode.
Guissu, thank you so much for joining us on the People Leader Accelerator Podcast. I've known of you longer than I've known you as a fellow member of the People Tech Partners, which is a great organization that we've all been a part of. Started out in the Bay Area, mostly HR leaders of tech companies. You had this amazing run at Instacart that's taken you to new heights and inside VC, and now you have left the investor world, at least in some ways, and have gone in-house again at an organization that we all know called GoFundMe. But for those of you that don't know you as well as Jess and I do, would you mind just sharing a little bit more about your background?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you again for having me. I'm Guissu Baier. I have the privilege of serving as GoFundMe's Chief People Officer. We have about 850 employees globally, and happy to share a lot more about all of the innovation and interesting cultural work that we're doing here. But in terms of my background, yes, as you said, I have a bit of an unconventional background. So I'm a recovering lawyer. I was a litigator at a global labor and employment law firm representing companies in various industries on a variety of matters, from single plaintiff issues to class actions. Then I joined Visa in-house as one of two employment attorneys globally, where my boss there, Jolyn Anderson, she's the Chief People Officer of BetterUp. She went on to become Visa's first Chief Diversity Officer and then a CHRO twice over. I share that because it sort of planted a seed in my mind of, oh, that's sort of an interesting path, particularly for an employment attorney, an executive path to consider and to pursue. Then I got bit by the startup bug during a really kind of interesting, different inflection point in tech where the gig economy was rising and Instacart was really coming onto the scene in the early days. I joined in 2015, initially as its first employment attorney, as the general counsel was building out its legal team. In a year's time, Apoorva, the founder and CEO, asked me to step in to lead HR. And that's when I made the move. And that's the last time I practiced law, back in 2016. Just that ride alone was incredible. I frankly didn't think I wanted to return to operating after my experience at Instacart, which is a lot of why I was inspired to co-found the People Collective, which was a consulting firm I led with a phenomenal co-founder of mine during another interesting point in history. Had the chance to work with companies of all sizes, but mostly I would say early stage to growth stage VC-backed companies. And we were also working directly with a number of venture capital firms as an extension of their talent teams. And that's ultimately what led me to General Catalyst, as they were sort of reimagining their executive talent function and wanting to enhance what was already going well on the executive talent side and invest more on advising their 800 plus active global portfolio company on business critical people practices. And so I was brought in to build out that practice and that muscle for GC and its portfolio, and kind of peek into work and venture, which is frankly something I had coveted for a long time. And I know there's a lot of curiosity about, and happy to share sort of my perspective there. And then the world totally changed. And the idea of operating just emerged as sort of a thing I was really drawn to come back to doing, and very fortunately led me back to operating and led me to operating at a phenomenal, iconic company.
Maybe I'll start with that early career as a lawyer. I think sometimes people who come from that background are stereotyped as being more risk averse or less people centric. Where have you actually found that it was beneficial to have that background? Where did it become an advantage for you?
I am very grateful for my legal background. It has forced me to change how I think. The way you get trained as a lawyer just is fundamentally different. And then so to be able to marry that training with being outside of the legal function and in sort of a business role, I feel like liberated in my ability to apply that thinking without having to be the sole owner of risk management. Look, sometimes people will see my background and go, oh, no, lawyer, she must be like all about HR compliance. And, obviously that plays a really important role. And we want to make sure that we are being thoughtful and compliant with the way that we operate. But as a former employment attorney, 90% of the problems that came my way were failures of culture or failures of communication. And so to me, this is the ultimate role in which I can get at root cause problem solving and really look at it from a 360 lens. I wouldn't have traded my experience as an employment lawyer for anything. And I'm very grateful here at GoFundMe and in other places where I've been to have had just incredible lawyers playing that role so that I can sort of play a different role and look at things from a different perspective. And sometimes they don't love that because I could be like, well, what about this or what about that? And I have a little bit of an edge on some of the topics that we might be debating, but I have really great relationships with all the lawyers we've worked with and very fortunate to continue to work with some really, really smart people who are helping us be thoughtful and also ultimately like really move fast by being so thoughtful. So
you have words of advice for the people in our audience who are potentially trying to work better with their legal counterparts? What should they keep in mind as they're trying to partner with a head of legal or somebody on the legal team or an employment lawyer? If they're having friction, what might be some of the most common reasons for that?
I mean, first and foremost, coming forward with like, here's the problem that we're trying to solve. The legal field, it's a consultative one. And so ultimately, you as a business leader are seeking consultation on legal risk, which is one of several risks that you're trying to manage. Reputational risk, legal risk, business risk. You really need to be looking at risk from many different angles. I think the best lawyers also look at it from those angles too. But when they don't, it's important to start with, here's a problem that we're trying to solve for. Here's how we see the business risk. Here's how we see the legal risk. This is sort of where we've gotten so far. And here's where some of the reputational risks lie. Here's what we'd like to do. Now give us your legal counsel on that in terms of how can we find a way. One of our values at GoFundMe is find a way. So how can we find a way to get to that outcome that we're looking for? And then that's much more of a bilateral relationship as opposed to one where you're being dictated to. I think you'll find that that will lead to a lot better outcomes ultimately for the business and also a better partnership, because I don't know that many lawyers that like really want to be the ultimate business decision maker and legal risk assessor on a particular issue. They're really looking for a relationship where they are able to bring their expertise to bear and then have that be adjudicated by the right people in the room. And sometimes that might be you, and sometimes that might be somebody maybe more senior or another business leader. This is my least favorite thing when I was a lawyer. Legal said we couldn't do this. I'm like, does said person have a name? What question did you pose to them? Where's the nuance in that, as opposed to just either allowing or relinquishing responsibility to that decision to one of your partners? And that's ultimately what they are as a partner.
You mentioned you were one of two lawyers, employment lawyers for Visa. And I imagine Visa was very large at that time. At what point in time does a company need a full-time employment lawyer?
Yeah, so Jolene and I were one of two employment attorneys globally. Visa at the time was 10,000 employees. And we were kind of going through a shift too of what are the employment counsel decisions that happen locally as a globally distributed company, and what are the ones that are important to be sort of centralized. This wasn't necessarily just unique to employment issues. It was just in general, our legal model and our people model, what should be local, what should be global, and how do we structure decision-making around that. But at this time, we were playing a pretty heavy role in any major decisions, whether it was reorganizations or RIFs or policy, sometimes investigations, depending upon what was going on. And so we were busy. And I know Jolene fought really hard to get me as a headcount at the time. And it's such a classic lawyer answer, but the answer really is it depends. And actually, we're discussing this as well internally here because it depends on Your risk tolerance, it depends on the volume of employee relations issues that you're navigating. It really depends the industry that you're in as well. If you're in the retail industry versus in tech, those things might look different. It also matters like what your cultural norms are. You might find more provocative cultures are going to hire an employee relations and employment attorney sooner than cultures that are sort of like less provocative in their policies or in their like cultural practices and norms. And then it also depends on the makeup of your legal team. Some legal teams are able to like pinch hit and handle volume, or they're comfortable with direct relationships between external counsel and their people teams. So a lot of those factors matter. And we were pretty like involved. Like I was reviewing like a lot of internal communications at Visa, handling myself a number of like more high profile investigations. We had matters that went before the audit committee. And, it mattered that there was a certain level of review or thoroughness to the way that we handled the work that we did. I mean, just in the classic sense, like I just believe in sort of solving that by looking at the facts that are in front of you in the company that you're in. So let's track. What is our volume of employee relations issues? How much of the people's team time is that really taking up? And not to like track people's hours like a law firm, but it is actually very helpful to know, okay, well, so we spent about 50 hours this first half of the year on investigations. Like, is that require full-time either headcount or review from an employment attorney? How frequently we need to update our policy? So I would actually just look at the facts and the volume of issues that are coming and measure that and then make an assessment. Of course, there's a cost assessment to be made, external counsel versus internal. But more importantly, I actually think having an internal, I'm biased obviously, but having an internal employment attorney as a thought partner that's really dedicated to the work the people team is doing, I actually think like will drive down reliance on external counsel on a lot of factors, but not because there's a person there, but because there's just more of that almost like business partnership counseling that's happening, similar that you might see with like a product lawyer or others as well. So yeah, I mean, that's a very long-winded, it depends answer.
We generally in PLA faculty believes there's no like one obvious right answer to questions like that. It's almost always, it depends. And then the value of the consultative approach is in the nuance and explaining, just like you did, what it depends on and what are those factors and what might push you in one direction versus another. So like really thank you for walking through that decision-making process. And as you were talking about that, I was comparing it to when should you bring on board executive search support versus working with external providers who are high-priced specialists versus internal support and any other sort of role, working through that sort of supply and demand and time and cost, and really love that. Hey, I would love to change tracks a little bit. And you mentioned venture capital work and how that tends to be of interest and desirable from many of the operators. And I do similar work in private equity with PE investors working with their portfolios. I'd love to hear you share with the audience a little bit more about like what that work is and how you first got engaged with General Catalyst.
So many iconic companies that are leading today and have been sort of leading for decades now have come from the General Catalyst portfolio. And I was very attracted to its track record. I was very attracted to its brand and very attracted to the responsible innovation thesis that General Catalyst has been really building upon and really investing in many ways, not just through its venture investments, but in a variety of ways. And, the way I came to General Catalyst was because of what we had built at the People Collective. We relied on talent partners to be lead generation for us in our business. It was all referral based, which is pretty typical for any kind of services business, consulting business in our field. And then we had a few who were eager to build out content and an advisory practice for their portfolio companies. So Lightspeed was one of our direct clients. Norwest was one of our direct clients. And actually Full Circle is a GoFundMe investor. And so that feels really fun to be now on the other side. And so General Catalyst, as I said, approached me because they wanted to build out something exclusively for their portfolio that served that purpose of really advising them on their business critical people practices, compensation, leadership development, performance across its 800 global portfolio. That's from the seed to growth stage. So the needs of those companies are very different. I was attracted to building. That was one of the reasons why it was a compelling opportunity for me, and sort of wrestle with the challenge of, okay, well, I'm not going to come and build. We're not going to do it like Andreessen did. Andreessen has a great offering as well, but just a very high volume, high touch experience. And we wanted to create something more scalable. So the challenge of creating a scalable operating model that would be able to serve such a diverse needs of our portfolio was very attractive to me. One thing I share with people who are curious about venture is that, all venture firms are the same and they're all different. If this is something that you are evaluating doing or coveting, I would make sure that you understand what it means for the particular firm that you are speaking with for and to. I'm sure, Andrew, you have a similar experience in terms of your PE partners. Some of them want you to go deep with their portfolio companies. Others want you to stay pretty high level. I had an investor say to me that being a venture investor is like being a grandparent in terms of your sphere of influence. So this is a clear distinction from PE, where you typically have majority ownership in the companies. Venture firms have minority stakes. And so, your leverage, it's really not even financial. It's like somewhat driven on whether or not you have a board seat, and really largely driven by your relationship with the founders and how you can influence some of their decisions in a way that sort of is aligned with the interests of the investors, which obviously you hope that for the most part they are, but of course they will diverge typically around things like cap table management and equity pool expansion. And so you want to create a motion that people are coming to you seeking wisdom. And just given the way that we were set up, it wasn't realistic for me to be able to go deep with our companies. And I did find myself very tempted to want to do that. So, I had many colleagues at other firms, smaller firms, or who had different value propositions, or that they were more focused on a certain stage, usually earlier stage, where they were able to be more hands-on and able to go deeper. And that was actually an expectation that they did that. So I would just, again, really think about how much that matters to you. I personally felt after a little while like the loss of being able to be going deep. I mean, even when I was consulting, we were fractional chief people officers for many of our clients for 6 months plus at a time. And so that sort of yields a different dopamine rush than when you're working in venture. So if you're on the non-investment side, and you're a dopamine junkie, I would really make sure that you think about that really carefully as a path.
Hey, hang tight. Here's something you'll want to know if you're leading people at a high growth company. Level up as an HR leader and join a lifetime community with People Leader Accelerator. Apply today. Now, back to the show.
General Catalyst is one where there's a lot of breadth. When I was with Felicis and Y Combinator, you see this wide range from early stage to kind of later stage in the portfolio. And so just the range of what your brain is needing to do on a regular basis is being stretched as well. I'm curious, as you looked across General Catalyst's portfolio, and I was lucky enough to have exposure to General Catalyst through Gusto and through Khan Academy back in my day.
Right.
What did you start to notice about founders, exec teams, or HR leaders that wasn't as clear as when you were in-house versus when you were starting to look across?
Yeah, it's to your point, that incredible ability to form some degree of pattern recognition, whether that's founder quality or leadership team quality or business quality. I think I'm a better investor than I was before I came to GC. I mean, one of the main things is nobody really has all the answers. One of my least favorite phrases is best practices, because I think there's a lot that you can learn from people who have been in the seat, and you should listen to that for sure. I'm not trying to discount the wisdom of that. That's actually part of what this podcast is about, right? Is that you're learning from other people's experiences. But that's also just what they are. They are other people's experiences, and nobody has it all figured out. You look at any chief people officer profile, for example, and, they will spike on different things. Some are great people ops, some are great at total rewards, some are great at L&D. Maybe one, maybe two things that you're like really great at, but not any one chief people officer is great at all the things. And part of my role at GC was to help founders think about their first, sometimes their second, sometimes their third people leader hire. And oftentimes what they got wrong was that they had in mind that this person was going to be an incredible recruiter. And I was like, great, you should go hire a head of talent. That's really what you're looking for. You should not be positioning this as a head of people ops. Well, but I also want them to administer benefits. Okay, well, like those are actually all very different skill sets. And, when you think about engineers, for example, this does not get confused, like a front-end engineer, back-end engineer, like there's a lot of specificity into what people's spikes and abilities and capabilities are. And yet that same clarity is not there for hiring in this role, which I think is part of what trips up a lot of founders. But to your question, one of my biggest takeaways was that everybody is just doing the best they can with the information that they have. And there is a beauty in particularly young founders, like inexperience, quite frankly, that allows them to just really innovate in a way that you don't see as much with those who have pattern recognition. And then that being said, in this day of AI, there's now roll-ups and the intersection of that, like really, experienced or entrenched industries benefiting from technology is leading to a lot of more experienced executives coming in to become quote unquote first-time founders. And it's really kind of changing the landscape of the different archetypes that venture funds are maybe used to seeing in terms of the investments that they're making. All of the things that we know maybe inherently are true. And I give General Catalyst kudos for really investing and making sure that their portfolio companies are better at assessing what are they really looking for in a leader when they're hiring them? How do they hold them to account? How do they communicate to the board around things like performance and compensation strategy? Those things are really important. And actually every company at every stage is dealing with some flavor of that, but where they're at on their maturity curve might be different. And it's not always perfectly aligned to how many rounds they've raised or how many employees they have. So in many ways, a lot of pattern recognition, and in other ways, everybody is in some ways an N of one, and you're kind of like in your journey figuring out how to navigate the particular challenge that's in front of you.
There was something really powerful you did a couple minutes ago, which was you translated, hey, this difficulty that you're having with hiring, if I just put this in terms of hiring an engineer instead of hiring your head of people, suddenly it was a way to translate into the language that maybe a technical founder would be able to better understand. And I just want to call that out because I think that's what great people leaders do, is that you are in many ways an educator and a translator for that founder, especially ones who may not have all the experiences and the pattern matching. And I think sometimes that's a misalignment or misexpectation about the role when you're going into a early stage company of like, how much time. I was just talking to a client about this. He's a head of people. And it was just like the inordinate amount of time that's being spent basically educating and translating with the CEO. And I'm like, that is way more time than if you go into a company with a very mature CEO, very experienced CEO. Maybe one more question on the VC side. Are there places where VCs oversimplify when it comes to people, things, or talent, or anything in this realm?
One other, I would just say, observation, and again, this is where it goes into the it depends category, is that I don't think enough investors are former operators. It's easy when you haven't lived it and experienced it and had to do it yourself or led a team through it to be able to say, well, how hard could it be? It's so obvious. Every company does it this way. And it's like, well, actually, if you look at the data, we conducted surveys at General Catalyst, some of which are still on the website, for example, on equity refreshes. There's a lot of conflict from time to time between companies and their investors on like what the right structure is for a refresh grant, and a lot of assumptions made about what's typical and what's not. I think some of the things that can get lost by some investors who don't have operating experience is the communication and change management, how that sits in terms of motivating a team, in terms of the way you're structuring compensation in particular, their depth of perspective in terms of the capabilities and skills that are being brought to bear by some of the folks on your team. And so that same education that we were talking about, maybe someone in our seats providing a founder or emerging head of people, that's actually incumbent upon the founder and his or her operating team to provide to investors and be able to tell that story and share that narrative. And sometimes investors are interested in that and sometimes they're not. It's not a great sign when your investors are like the ones pushing you to go and do it. I would say in venture, when that's happening, that's usually not like a great sign. But if they were like rather proactively coming to you and saying like, hey, here's some artifacts that you might want to think about, or here's some structures on how best for us to have open communication about how your talent is performing and why you think this is the right approach from a compensation standpoint. I think those things will really help. So I think there's like a lot of assumptions on both sides, I would say. Investors have pattern recognition, so they might be like, well, this is very common. This is how everybody does it. And on the flip side, founders may just assume that their investors know better than they do on some things. And the truth is, like, they probably don't. Nobody should know your business better than you do. And you should really think about what kind of aunt, uncle, grandparent you're seeking input from through your investors. Like, are they coming from lived operating experience? What assumptions are they making when they are bringing you advice? And actually asking them in a really professional way, like, great, tell me more why you think that. What are you basing that on? Why don't you show me your data? I'll show you my data and we can see where we're misaligned or where we actually are closer than what we think. And so instead what happens is like, sometimes conflict can emerge because, they're just like not even paying attention and they're not being thoughtful and they want to ask for all this more equity. Or on the flip side, us making assumptions about what's considered market for a particular company or role and not really like scrutinizing the assumptions that might be going into it. The short answer is yes. And the long answer is incumbent upon founders to make sure that they're really clear about what they are getting from their investors and what lived experience and or pattern recognition they're bringing to bear in the advice that they're giving, and not just like take it on as like, oh, my investor said I should do this. Let me just go do that.
Demystifying those relationships can be one of the bigger value adds that a value creation advisor or a talent partner or an HR leader that may have had some of that experience and insight from the past can provide to that equation. Like, there's often power dynamics. There's often some level of fear. I see in private equity where it tends to be a control relationship and a founder may or may not be continuing with the business, and first-time CEOs and the founders on the board, and it can be complicated. Mm-hmm. And so having someone that has sat in the seat that you have been in with GC to help explain how it works and explain what it all depends on can help create a much more healthy environment in those complicated, and not always boardroom. It's often like one-on-one phone calls and let's just quickly grab a video chat. And that can be scary from a lot of different angles. I'd love to dig like one layer deeper, maybe two. We'll see how far you'll go. Where is the grass greener? I think the answer is probably it depends, but like help our audience parse through how's the work differ between VC and in-house, and where should someone expect to spike in skills and time spent, and like,
yeah.
Does it make sense for everyone to covet the VC jobs? Probably not, but help us understand what it depends on.
I think that if you are really done operating, I think being in a venture environment as a former operator is a really fun playground to play in, especially if you're at a values aligned firm. And at most places you get to shape your role. Like, you have sort of an investor or two that may be sort of an advocate, but for the most part, you're pretty autonomous. And in my mind, it was like, it's kind of like building out my consulting practice, like within the umbrella and with the resources and brand of a great firm. If you really feel like there is no operating role that would call to me again, and which I frankly felt that way when I joined GC, then I think that venture can be a really fun playground to like gift back to others your experiences and hopefully help them make better choices in a way that can feel really rewarding. I don't recommend it for people who are early in their career. I don't think that most firms have a structure. In fact, most of them don't operate as well as the majority of their best, even maybe sometimes worse portfolio companies do, in my opinion. And so the sort of apparatus, the people, infrastructure, development, and learning, especially for non-investors, is just not typical. Now, I don't want to say never, because there are many different kinds of firms out there. So you have to do your homework. So it's not a place for early careers, in my view. That would just be one, I guess, caution that I would provide. I think the other factors that are important kind of relating to that is like, what is important to you and like what does feel rewarding to you? Most operators I know who have gone into venture have not stayed for a long time unless they are like done and they're like, I've been the chief people officer of like, you know, a company that's gone public twice over now or whatever it may be, and like I'm done operating. I've not found many others that have like found it like tremendously rewarding from like the people side, I would say. It has like historically been very talent and executive talent oriented venture for a variety of reasons. And that is a very high value offering that many venture firms provide. And in that case, I think it's very different. So I do want to really distinguish my answer from those that are coming from like recruiting or exec recruiting backgrounds from those that are like coming from, you know, even business operating experiences in a business development role or a sales, you know, operating role, for example. Those are some of the flavors of operating partners that I have noticed. So I personally feel like being able to play a role that is directly impacting the core business is a lot more rewarding. We can tell a story about how like founders are really like the core of the people, and then the people within those portfolio companies are highly valuable and they're driving value creation. That, of course, is like true. But if you think about it, then the most important point in time is around the selection of the investment. So if you're involved in sort of like helping select the founder or the founding team for an investment situation, or playing almost an investor, like on the investment team, but with that lens of people, then I feel like you're like core to the business that venture is or an investment firm is. And then otherwise, you're like almost sort of a service on top of a service in some ways. And so on a bad day, it's great marketing. And on a great day, you've really made a difference for somebody. And yeah, I personally just feel like for me, I had 3 criteria when choosing to go back to operating. And one of them was a role in which I wanted to have like really clear impact. And I found that to be in an operating role. I'm not sure that venture always provides that opportunity to you.
And if you like to see impact, it's hard to really be able to attribute as clearly to that. And I think you're right on the recruiting side. It is different because it's like you helped bring in this exact person who went into the business and you can see that line. And it's also that the rest of the firm can see that line of like, this is the value that the recruiting part brings. And then the value that these other roles on the people side, I think everybody knows there's in theory value to that.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's really hard on the ROI of being able to like have that direct connection as clearly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and we had like all the metrics and the anecdotes and all the things. And I feel like we got really to a good place of being able to tell that story. And it's actually less so around the perceived value or ROI and more so for your own like sense of satisfaction. Like, does that hit? And for some people it does. So I don't want to take that away from anybody, and nor there's there any judgment for me around that. Just for me, as the world changed and the way of being able to like lead through this moment in time and history, like became apparent to me, I just felt like too young to be a great aunt.
Can we talk a bit more about like what drew you back into the operating side? What were the things that you missed the most? And when you looked for this particular role to become an operator again, what did you prioritize to find the right place for you?
So I really wanted 3 things as I thought about my next operating role. One was a thriving and enduring business. Most venture-backed companies don't make it. And there's a lot of overvaluation. There was a few years ago, and I think many people believe another bubble again. And so I really was looking for something that was durable. So really later stage private and or even a public company that still had its startup DNA. So it was still scrappy and innovating. So that was my number one. My number 2 is a mature leadership team. And you could use age as a proxy for that, but that's not always the case either, as we know, in either direction. And so what I was really looking for is, a mature CEO, a mature leadership team, and a team of peers with whom I really felt like I wanted to get into the trenches with on hard problems. And then the third was just a role where I could have impact and a scope in which I could have impact. So, I wasn't attached to, it has to be a chief people officer title. It has to be a company of a certain size or stage. In fact, that did me a lot of disservice as I was embarking on my search, because most search partners want to be able to put you into a box of, okay, I want to be in an early stage company or a late stage company. And they sort of run through their list of companies that they have that sort of map back to that. And it's not a knock on search firms, because creates a more predictable business model when you are able to provide that matching. And you then have to be the creative bridge that can tell a story that ignites somebody's thinking to be oh, you're interested in all industries and you have fintech experience and consumer experience, and help them see okay, so actually healthcare could be interesting, fintech could be interesting. And so I was sector agnostic, stage agnostic, but not really. I really was more biased towards the later stage opportunities, even though I entertained some of the earlier stage ones. And some of those other dimensions in terms of maturity of leadership and scope. And with GoFundMe, it was just such a delightful surprise to learn about all the innovation that is happening. My good friend, Adam Ward, who is running Growth by Design Talent, I was one of his last searches before their acquisition by Cursor. He came to me with GoFundMe. My initial reaction was not, especially in this moment in time, how much innovation is happening. And what I quickly came to learn was just how innovative GoFundMe is and how it is so much more than being the largest fundraising platform in the world, which it is. I mean, since its inception, GoFundMe has helped raise over $40 billion since 2010, which is incredible. And last year alone, we had nearly 80 million donations across our platform. So most people are really familiar with that consumer side story. We also have a SaaS business, and together we're bringing the powers of the two together to generate a marketplace business, and we're innovating products for that. So last year we released our giving funds, which is a more modern, accessible take on a DAF. Some people might be familiar with sort of a DAF product that you have with
donor advised fund.
That's right, a donor advised fund. Most donor advised funds come with high fees, or there's high friction in your ability to then deploy those savings. It's sort of tax sheltered or structured savings accounts. But with our giving funds product, it is a consumer grade product that's at your fingertips that you can use almost the way you use an Apple Wallet to be able to donate to causes, to nonprofits that are important to you. If you're thinking about sort of what causes those might be and you don't even know where to begin, and maybe you're early in your philanthropy journey, we actually have a search capability to be able to help you find those that are along the themes that are important to you, whether it might be around animal shelters or healthcare or cancer, whatever it may be. And so that really creating a platform that is pro-social in nature, that is helping people help each other, using technology and getting more creative about some products that may have always existed, but making them more accessible, is just one slice of the innovation that's happening here at GoFundMe, and a big part of its next chapter of growth. And that was very exciting to me and sort of helped me just get really excited about the kind of impact that we can drive here, not just for the company, but for society.
Yeah, I love it. And I can hear it in your voice as you're talking about it, just how passionate you are about the business, which is wonderful to see. What are 1 to 2 things happening on your team right now that are part of this innovation that you see that's happening at GoFundMe that you're most excited about in 2026?
The people team is going through a transformation of its own alongside as we're helping the company go through its cultural transformation. And just like so many other companies, we are making sure that we're applying AI where we can. Our talent team has just deployed MetaView. That's one of the things we're working on. And we're very much in the early days of our own AI adoption for the people team. I have an awesome person on my team who has a ton of experience around this type of transformation at other companies. And she's really helping to spearhead change there. We're also, maybe sort of not as tech forward, but still equally critical. And as you know, in this world of AI, that critical thinking, human in the loop is so important. And so like we are really like from first principles reimagining like what is performance? What do we expect of our leaders? And that's been really fun work to do. And we're using ChatGPT to help expedite the creation process around that.
So our audience often joins our podcasts to grow their careers. And so would love to hear your advice to them about resources that our listeners might benefit from. What are 2 or 3 resources that you think could help grow their career?
One of my favorites, and I've used this at companies of really all sizes and stages, is The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. We used it a ton at the People Collective as well as we worked on projects with our clients. It's a very simple framework. It's really clear and it's really easy to use as a reference to jump back into from time to time. So I highly recommend that one. And I listened to Jevan's podcast, my good friend Jevan Sue, and he also talked about Powerful, which was going to be one of the books that I was going to recommend. So I'm just going to actually double click and +1 Powerful. I very much look up to Patty McCord and her podcast together with Jessica, both former Netflix CHROs. TruthWorks, I think, is actually a really great podcast as well. And I encourage you to listen to like non-people oriented, just like business podcasts and books as well, because I find those very fruitful.
I spent a lot of time listening to the 20-minute VC during drives into San Francisco. That was really helpful to understand how it works. Next one for you, Guissu, and then I'll turn it over to Jess to wrap us up. What one sentence of advice can you offer our listeners about how to accelerate a successful HR career?
Take risks, raise your hand, jump at different opportunities, go in and out of the people function, go observe and learn what other functions are doing and draw inspiration from that. Don't look for a playbook and don't look for a ladder.
I love how this is like full circle from where we started and talked about your legal background and how often they have a reputation for being risk averse. It's amazing. I think why it makes you such a strong people leader is that you see beyond that. For those who would love to follow up with you, how would they be able to best connect with you?
I try and keep up with LinkedIn, although I find myself catching up on an inbox that is abundant. So if I don't get back to you right away, then I will eventually, I promise.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure as always.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a true pleasure. I appreciate you.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of People Leader Accelerator Podcast, where we talk with business and HR leaders about what makes great leadership and great work. We hope you walked away with at least one game-changing insight for you and your team. You can find show notes and free bonus resources at peopleleaderaccelerator.com/podcast. If today's conversation sparked something for you, hit subscribe, leave a quick review, and share this episode with that one colleague who really needs to hear it. You know who I'm talking about. And if you're currently navigating the tricky waters of hiring top talent, developing leaders who actually lead, or building a culture that fuels growth, let's talk. You can find us at peopleleaderaccelerator.com. We're here to help you and your team not just survive, but truly thrive. I'm Jess Yuen, and on behalf of my co-host, Andrew Bartlow, thanks for investing your valuable time with us. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. Until next time, keep learning and keep leading.